Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Dimension Force marks the end of the 2021-2022 cycle of core set releases, which means it's time for another groundbreaking season finale of an ongoing storyline. Now, the last story we followed, the World Legacy, wrapped up its major story beats in 2 years. And while we're coming up to the same amount of time in the Albaz storyline, based on what we're going to look at today, we might be here for just a little while longer. But we're not just covering the new cards in Dimension Force, cause back in December, the Albaz Strike Structure deck was released, showing off not just a slew of new cards, but also tokens that might provide even more clues to illuminate the nature of this story. And also, Mecha Gladiator Beasts for some reason. So, let's theorize with Therions, analyze the antagonism between Albaz and Aluber, then see how it all fits together. This is the Dimension Force and Albaz Strike Lore Explained. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and the first stop on our trip is 20k, which means we're incredibly close to unlocking You Say Explained, where we'll be covering Junks, Stardust, and whatever other cards can help us rev it up. We've also got our Discord that has its own dedicated lore channel, so we can all come together to try and find out what in the heck is going on. You can also follow me on Twitch, where you can join me for viewer duels and progression pulls, and don't forget about my Patreon, where you can gain access to my videos early, reach some of these milestones, as well as helping to determine which explained videos I make. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So, one of the reasons I want to start with Therions this episode is that they only tangentially relate to the Albaz story, but might become relevant later on. And we know this because many of the spells and traps of the archetype feature tri-brigade Kitt traveling with Spriggan's Captain Sargus. But if you took them out of the picture, you'd hardly know they were part of the same world. But what's the deal with Therions? Well, as monsters, they actually don't have any unifying parameters, be it type, attribute, or level. Instead, all the Therion monsters have an effect they can use in hand by targeting another Therion monster in grave, or any monster that shares a type with it. For instance, the plant one can target a plant monster or a Therion, which special summons the Therion in your hand and equips the target in grave to that monster. They all have their own unique effect, but can confer that effect to any Therion they're equipped to, as well as providing a nifty 700 attack boost. This gives the monsters a kind of fungible, nope, can't use that word anymore. This gives the monsters a kind of mutable quality. Once you hit the mid-game, any Therion can be any other Therion, which can be a huge headache for your opponent, considering one of them is an Omni-Negate. So let's start things off with Therion's Bull's Ein, a level 7 Fire Warrior monster with 2100 attack and 1600 defense, and they can target a Therion's card you control and a card your opponent controls and destroy them. It's some nifty 1-for-1 removal that's even more efficient than it looks on paper, because the card you own that you destroyed was probably a free +1 anyway. Just equipping Ein with the summon effect of the Therions does the trick. They also have some funny applications in Infernoble, as Malgus, Ogier, and Oliver will confer all their protections when equipped to Ein. Heck, equip them with Ogier and you can use the pop effect targeting Ein and lose nothing. And fun fact, Gokis don't care what zone they're in before being sent to the grave, just that they were sent from the field to the grave. So if you lose Ein while equipped to a Goki, then you're gonna get that search. It just goes to show that when you mess with the bull, you get the scrap dragon. Therion's Leaper Fam is a level 7 water aqua monster with 1400 attack and 2500 defense, and during your opponent's turn, as a quick effect, you can target a Therion's card in your spell and trap zone and a card your opponent controls and return them to the hand. This has similar utility to Ein, but now you can play it as an interruption, though you're limited to only being able to bounce back equipped Therions. And this can be exceedingly useful as a way to not only throw a wrench in your opponent's plan, but also put a Therion back in your hand to summon it later for more aggro. Fam is definitely less splashable, and not many Aquas have unconditional effects that trigger when sent from the field to the grave. Poison Draw Frog will guarantee you a draw though, and Guardian Slime can search you a Winged Dragon of raw card. But the less said about that Urchin Head's ace monster, the better. Therion's Duke Jewel is a level 8 light psychic monster with 2100 attack and 2800 defense, and while you control an equipped card, Therion's monsters you control cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. This is an outstanding addition because the drawback of all equipped strategies is that by removing the base monster, you take out all the cards equipped to it, causing a huge swing in card advantage. But Jewel here can keep that from happening. And while its only inherent effect is continuous, it's not going to sit around doing nothing, because it'll gain the effect of the Therion it equips. If you equip a Therion, that is. There's not a lot of synergy splashing in other psychic decks insofar as abusing Send from the Field to the Grave effects, but you could play this as more column setup in Mech Knights. You get a monster on board, and you can place a Mech Knight in whatever spell and trap zone is best, so you won't have to worry about poor column management getting in the way of duking it out. Therion's Lily Berea is a level 8 wind plant monster with 2400 attack and 2500 defense, and you can send a card from your hand or field to the grave to add a Therion spell or trap from your deck to your hand. Now, we haven't gotten to any of those yet, but know that we can get our hands on a draw card, monster negation, monster searching, and revival. And since you can send literally any card, it's basically perfect hand fixing, even in decks that are only splashing in other Therions for their type synergies. But this does work especially well in plants, as you can pitch cards that can revive themselves like Spore and World Carrot Weight Champion, and even Miracle Fertilizer if you're going to lose it anyway to its own effect. Or get grave triggers. Laurel can get you a life point gain trigger for Air Mages, Botanical Girl for searches, or Flower Bot for card selection. So whether you equip a Therion or a plant, Lily will always be a thorn in your opponent's side. Our last monster is Therion's King Regulus, a level 8 Earth Machine monster with 2800 attack and 1600 defense. And when your opponent activates a card or effect as a quick effect, you can send a Therion's monster card from your hand or field to the grave to negate that effect. Now, the wording here is very important. Like with Plunder Patrol, Regulus is looking for a card that is a monster, not just a monster. So you can even send a Therion's that's equipped to a monster, because despite being treated as a spell card, it's still a monster card. This means Regulus normally hits the field as a 3500 attack monster that can take a 700 attack point hit to negate anything, and depending on the Therions you equipped, can advance your game plan in other ways as well. And even without the Therions bonus, this is a huge boon to machine decks in general. You don't even need to find machines with good grave triggers. It's a free 2800 point body that can trade itself for any card, and if your archetype setup dies to only 1 or 2 hand traps, negating them with Regulus is going to have your opponent thinking of another game plan. Alright, now it's time for our spells and traps, and the first one we'll be covering isn't name-stamped as a Therion, but it's super important, especially if you're trying to play hybrid builds. Perpetual Engine Argyro System. It's a normal spell that sends a Therion card from your deck to the grave, and if in the grave, you can target another Therion's card in your grave and either add Argyro or the targeted card to your hand, and if you do, place the other on the bottom of your deck, but you can only use one effect per turn and only once per turn. Now, optimally, you'll be sending Argyro to the grave using other effects so you can keep using the recycling effect to get cards out of the grave. But if we need a Therion in grave to summon one in hand, this is a great setup for him, especially because you'll be selecting whichever effect you want to tack onto the Therion you summon. And it recycles cards, which is great because you normally want to keep your Therions in grave to enable the ones in your hand, so you can instead grab other extenders. But if you have a grave full of Therions and nothing in play, getting back one to your hand certainly is a strong option. It just does so much for the deck, from getting it started to enabling future plays, but I'm not terribly surprised. It's literally an engine card. Therion's Charge is a normal spell that sends a Perpetual Engine Argyro System or Therion's card from your hand or face-up spell and trap zone to the grave, except another copy of itself, to draw 2 cards. The good old archetypal draw 2 spell. And like those, it's not only a way to dig for more cards, it also sets up your other plays. You get the recycle from Argyro, or you can send a Therion to set up for the summon of another one. So despite having a discard cost, it hardly charges you anything. Therion's Ring, the Colosseum Saucer, is a field spell that, when activated, adds a Therion's monster from your deck to your hand. Once per turn, if your monster would be destroyed by battle, you can send a Therion's card or Perpetual Engine Argyro System from your deck to the grave instead. And also once per turn, when any number of monsters are destroyed by battle and sent to the grave, you can target a Therion's monster in your grave and add it to your hand. So not only does this get you into a monster to start your plays, it also provides battle protection that also sets up other cards, and should that protection give out, it gets you back another monster to play next turn. Sadly, it doesn't help with effect destruction, but that's what Jewel is for. So it's like a Rhoda but with extra benefits until your opponent uses resources to get rid of it. And on top of everything else, the name has a really nice ring to it. Therion's Cross is a normal trap that you can activate when your opponent activates a monster effect while you control a Therion's monster. You can use one of the following effects, but you can resolve both in sequence if Perpetual Engine Argyro system is in your grave. First is negating that effect, and the second is banishing that monster. So while not a counter trap, as long as you have the setup, it can serve a similar purpose. And sometimes you won't even need both. While negating and banishing is helpful against on-board threats, just negating most hand traps is good enough. And if their effect is inconsequential, then hey, you can just banish them so you can cross them off the list. Our last card is Therion's Stand-Up, a normal trap that targets a Therion's monster in your grave and special summons it. Then you can equip a Therion's monster from your hand or grave to it. And during the main phase, you can banish this card from your grave, then target a Therion's monster you control and a Therion's monster in your grave, and equip the monster in your grave to the monster you control. And you can only use one effect per turn, and only once per turn. So here we have a revival trap that also makes sure your monster has a Therion equipped for maximum value. And I cannot stress just how impactful it is that one of your targets is an Omni-Negate. Heck, you can summon Regulus on your opponent's turn, equip them with Fam, granting you a quick effect bounce on top of the negate. Then next turn, you can attach Fam right back by banishing Stand-Up so you can get that bounce again. It's an incredible way to get you back into a duel, but for the last time, despite the name, Therion's Stand-Up is not a JoJo reference. Okay, so that's all the Therion cards, but what do we do with them? Well, there's not really a lot to talk about. I don't know if it's because I want to get into the rest of the video as soon as possible, or if I already covered everything worth talking about for each Therion, but the game plan is pretty cut and dry. You summon as many Therions as possible to beat as much face as possible. We aren't going to want to play much back row because that takes room away from our equipped monsters, and we need to keep as much room available as possible for our own on-theme cards. Apply battle damage and interruptions as needed, and there you go, you've got a win. Now, lore-wise, as stated previously, this is an interesting chapter in the story. It looks like Kitt and Sargus are traveling by themselves because I'm not seeing any other Springans. And from the looks of it, Kitt is pretty happy to have found where the Therions are. Now, the flying saucer-looking ring that's the focal point of the Therions does give off an alien vibe, and I'm not saying they can't be, but I think the Therions are a bit more established than just being a giant space fleet from nowhere. If you look closely, you can see this tube connecting the ring to this active volcano, so it might be siphoning some kind of geothermal energy. There's also all the buildings around here that don't quite match up to the kinds we see inside the ring, but it does have the same kind of industrial feel. And I'm at least assuming this is the inside of the ring because of the whole battle and Colosseum theming. Also, this looks like it's supposed to be Argyro, and it's overlooking the arena. Now, why all the fighting? Well, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say after the events going on in other cards, Kitt is traveling around looking for allies to fight Despia, and who better to team up with than a bunch of super strong gladiators. But, surprise surprise, if you want to enlist the help of career combatants, you have to prove you can take them on, and Sargus does a pretty good job of it, as seen in Therion's Charge. In fact, it looks like by this point Sargus has already overpowered Ein, because you can see their lance right here, so it looks like Sargus is wielding it. But the premier fight is between Sargus and Regulus, and mechanically, that makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised if Regulus wanted to add Sargus to their machine collection. And they have a lot in common. Same type, same level, they almost even have mirrored stats. But we won't know who won this climactic battle until later. But there might be another connection between the Therions and the Spriggans. Take a look at Argyro again. Why does the engine of your whole Colosseum have eyes? Is it sentient? Why does it look like it has Xyz material? But you know what else has eyes that really shouldn't? The Spriggans. Remember, they aren't the machines we see in the cards, but little soot beings as emphasized in the concept art. They're some kind of semi-gaseous entity that possessed equipment using it as a suit. Now, Argyro is hovering above the stadium, not wearing it, but if they ever needed the Colosseum to be mobile, I wouldn't be surprised that it do the same thing as the Spriggans do for their mech suits. They even have very similar eye design. I'd almost go so far as to say they're identical. So if Regulus saw that there were more things like Argyro out there that could be used as a power source, it sounds exactly like the kind of bartering chip you would use for a competition. fight our best gladiators, and if you win, we'll help you against the Despia. If you lose, you have to join our crew. Though, since our time with the Therions ends here for now, we won't really get to confirm if they're that ruthless, or if they were just fighting for the fun of it before moving on to other things. But what are those other things? Well, we're gonna have to go back to the Albaz Strike Structure deck to catch up on what happened after we left off in Battle of Chaos. The first few cards are going to be monsters that we haven't had cards for yet, or are updates to keep them current with the timeline, though their art doesn't really give us much story information. Tri-brigade Mercurier is a level 4 Dark Winged Beast monster with 800 attack and 0 defense. When your opponent activates a monster effect while you control a fusion monster that lists Fallen of Albaz as material, as a quick effect you can send this card from your hand or field to the grave to negate that effect. And if banished, you can add a Fallen of Albaz or a monster that lists that card in its text from your deck to your hand. So Mercurier is a pretty neat hand trap for the Albaz fusion deck and helps utilize those cards in Tri-brigade, as banishing this card for the Gravelink effects of your Tri-brigades will trigger this search effect. But since that deck is probably the worst at utilizing the Albaz cards, you can also banish them by using them as material for the fusion summon of Lubellion through the branded spells that fusion summon. Not branded fusion, because that's a whole other card. Boy, talking about these is going to be confusing. Springgan's Kitt is a level 4 Dark Beast monster with 1700 attack and 1000 defense, and if you have a fusion monster that lists Fallen of Albaz as material on your field or in your grave, you can special summon Kitt from your hand. And if normal or special summoned, you can add a branded spell or trap from your deck, or that is banished, or that's in your grave to your hand, then place a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. Another really strong card to utilize Albaz cards in Springgans, because it's great material for Merrymaker, but you'll probably be focusing more on its applications in an Albaz Good Stuff deck, because yeah, making sure you always have the right branded card is pretty nifty. It also lets you run more brick cards with confidence, because Kitt can stick them right back into your deck for later use. But what gets me is that Kitt is literally utilizing the power of the whole. Check out the maw in Kitt's right hand gauntlet. It has a small string of them, kinda like the ones that come out of Aluber's head. We're not sure how Kitt can do this, probably has something to do with the spare parts left behind by the giant serpent of Golgonda, but it does prove that even if Despia and Dogmatica control it with some kind of magic, there is a way to manipulate it with technology. But to what end, I couldn't say. Especially because it looks like Kitt isn't using any of it during the Therion arc. So I guess Kitt doesn't really have their entire kit. Unlikely Swordsoul Allies is a combination of Dogmatica Aiden and Theo, who skipped town with Fleur once Despia went full mask off. Or rather, mask on. They're a level 4 light spellcaster tuner monster with 1800 attack and 1500 defense, and when a monster declares an attack, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, negate that attack. And if you control a fusion monster that lists Fallen of Albaz as material, you can destroy the monster that declared an attack. And if any number of monsters are banished face up, except during the damage step, you can banish this card from your field or grave to special summon a light spellcaster monster with attack equal to its own defense from your hand or grave. And while all the Dogmaticas are spellcasters, this does only summon the Ecclesia and Fleur versions, so that's pretty thematically consistent. But it can also summon other cards, like Maiden with Eyes of Blue, and Lumina Lightsworn Summoner. You know, cards that would totally be played in an Albaz deck. But seriously, this makes for an excellent combat trick to halt a nasty attack on your Albaz fusions, while giving you the opportunity to flex into Incredible Ecclesia, which can quick summon Fallen of Albaz for some fusion nabbing shenanigans. Which is good, because after abandoning the Dogmatica Church, they're not getting any of their class features back for a long time. Okay, that catches us up with all the characters. Let's check in on the story so far. Last we left off, Ecclesia and Albaz left Fleur in the care of the Ice Jades, hoping that their cradle would help to cleanse Fleur of their stigmata, the mark given to the members of Dogmatica to give them great power, but also leverage their control. However, whether motivated by a misguided attempt to protect their master or a grab for power all its own, Long Yuan betrayed the Swordsoul and the Ice Jade both, presumably besting Mo Yi in battle and taking their weapon. And while they assaulted the Inian Cradle, Aluber arrived using the Hole to confront Albaz and Ecclesia. We pick up in the artwork for Paradise Branded, a continuous spell that prevents your cards and effects that include fusion summoning effects from being negated and keeps your opponent from activating cards or effects when a monster is fusion summoned this way, remarkably similar to Magical Meltdown. And if you fusion summon a fusion monster, except during the damage step, you can add a Fallen of Albaz, or a monster that lists that card in its card text, from your deck to your hand. So not only will your fusion effect be safe, but one fusion will beget another, getting you the next part of your combo so you can keep extending. Here, we can see Aluber manipulating long chains of the Hole to constrict Albaz, still stuck in their black-clad Albion form, in a way that's disturbingly reminiscent of the Great Serpent of Golgonda. Albaz's own brand may provide some protection against the corruption, but no matter what, it seems that the chains are more than effective at restraining them. Now, we've seen that, in times of great stress, Albaz can absorb the essence of their environment to grow stronger. But presumably, Albaz is already in one such form, a more subdued version of Albion. But it would appear that this isn't the limit of that capability. So either in a desperate bid to free themselves of the Whole chains, or perhaps being compelled by them, Albaz absorbs the power of the Ice Jade Cradle, breaking free and becoming Mirror Jade the Ice Blade Dragon, a level 8 Dark Worm fusion monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense, requiring the Fallen of Albaz, as well as any fusion, synchro, Xyz, or link monster as material. You can only control one Mirror Jade, and as a quick effect once per turn, you can send a fusion monster that lists Fallen of Albaz as material from your extra deck to the grave to banish a monster on the field, but this effect cannot be used again the next turn. And if this fusion summoned card in its owner's control leaves the field by your opponent's card, you can activate an effect that destroys all monsters your opponent controls during the end phase. This is a monstrously powerful card, not only sending Albaz fusions to the grave to get their effect during the end phase, but also leveraging that non-targeting banishing removal. And while it may be on a delay, there are very few ways to avoid Mirror Jade's Raigeki effect, as it triggers whenever removed from the field. And it cannot be stressed enough, this makes the Fallen of Albaz a serious threat, as any extra deck monster can get scooped up and they'll be replaced by this. As mentioned previously, the Albaz fusion takes on the characteristics of an archetype they're near, and Mirror Jade seems to be taking on too. Mirror Jade, the Ice Blade Dragon, pretty clearly ties it to the Ice Jades, while the Worm typing is indicative of the Swordsouls. The connection is deepened by the numerous swords at its disposal, each being made of the same Ice Jade material that the Swordsoul weapons are made of. But since the only Swordsoul that seemed to be present at the time was the Despia corrupted Catastrophe Long Yuan, which definitely was not absorbed, it makes me wonder if the Ice Jade swords are what made the Swordsoul's worms in the first place. I mean, Allies, Iris, and Incredible Ecclesia are Swordsouls, or at least Swordsoul support, and they're all spellcasters. But Chun-Jun doesn't have a sword either, unless the horn on its head counts. We also can't ignore that it doesn't have the usual 2500 attack, 2000 defense stat line of the rest of the Albaz fusions. But that's either because they really did absorb two different sources of power, or because they were starting from the base 2500 attack Shrouded Albion. But this is a curiosity that doesn't really have any bearing on the story at the moment. What does shed some light on the order of events is Branded Blade. It's a normal trap that can banish any number of branded spells and traps from your grave to special summon just as many Ice Blade tokens, which are level 8 Dark Dragon monsters with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. And you can banish this card from your grave to target one of your banished Fallen of Albaz's, or a monster that specifically lists that card in its text, and add it to your hand. You can only use one effect per turn, and only once per turn. This seems like an excellent late game card, as this can close out games by itself. Summon out a bunch's blockers on your opponent's turn as needed before rushing your opponent with any that survive, or just use them as link material. It puts you under literally zero restrictions. And the ability to recycle your banished Albaz monsters is pretty sick. You won't even lose your banished branded cards forever because you can get them back with Springen's Kitt. Blades shows the moment Mirror Jade gets the drop on Catastrophe Long Yuan, and I don't think the Swordsoul traitor survives much longer, as we don't see them in any more artwork from this point on. The tokens, though, have a very interesting stat line, as they mimic Titaniclad, and more importantly, Albions. And if we ignore the type, then that's the same for all the other fusions we've seen so far, including the pseudo-Albaz fusion, Masquerade the Blazing Dragon. This seems to imply that each of Mirror Jade's Ice Blades has the power of an individual fusion, and that is terrifying, though not entirely without precedent. After all, the bubbles shown in Tremora's card show moments from across the storyline. Could these blades hold the essence of each fusion pulled from across time, or perhaps stored as some kind of energy? Once again, another aspect of the story that's hit a dead end, as we can only speculate without further proof. But Aluber isn't sitting idly by. We've already gotten a glimpse at how they have a similar fusion ability as Albaz, having previously become Masquerade, something we can confirm by checking the red jewels on Aluber's body that match somewhat on Masquerade. And now they're doing the same thing with Lubellion the Searing Dragon, a level 8 light dragon fusion monster with 2500 attack and 3000 defense, requiring a dark monster and Fallen of Albaz as material. And we'll get into that templating in a bit. If fusion summoned, you can discard a card to fusion summon a level 8 or lower fusion monster from your extra deck, except another copy of itself, by shuffling materials listed on it into the deck from among your cards on the field, your grave, and/or face-up banished cards. But for the rest of the turn, this card can't attack, and you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck except fusion monsters. This makes for the perfect companion to Albion the Branded Dragon, because it's the miracle fusion to Lubellion's Parallel World fusion. And while neither are incredibly impactful on their own, both make for excellent ways to fusion not only more of your Albaz fusions quickly and efficiently, but any level 8 or lower fusion monster that has generic enough materials to be supported by monsters already in your deck. Now, there are a lot of things up with this card that we need to talk about. First off, we can confirm that this is Aluber, because they once again have the red gem placements on the head, chest, and hands. Second, the fusion material formatting. In every other card across the entirety of Yu-Gi-Oh!, if a specific monster is needed, it always goes first, followed by more generic material. In the case of Lubellion, that's been flipped, and that's not the only thing, as it has mirrored stats to Albaz's current form, Mirror Jade, sporting 2500 attack and 3000 defense. And where Mirror Jade is the Ice Blade Dragon, Lubellion is the Searing Dragon. And we've already talked about how Lubellion and Albion have a very similar effect, but go about it in arguably opposite ways. It feels like everything about this Aluber fusion was manufactured to be the exact opposite of Albaz, thus cementing the idea that these two are opposite, though linked, entities. Another interesting note is how Albion and Lubellion's fusion effects both work very similarly to the cards Branded in White and Branded in Red. Both Albion and Branded in White can banish material from the grave, while Lubellion and Branded in Red both make it so a monster can't attack that turn. Another clue to their origin might be that the metal plating on Lubellion bears some, though admittedly not striking, resemblance to Titaniclads. Now, in the very first video, I surmised that Titaniclad was an Albaz fusion where our little dragon absorbed the power of the Dogmatica Nexus upon impact after having been ejected from whatever dimension is on the other side of the hole. But if Aluber and Albaz both come from this world that's beyond the hole, then this must be something from that dimension that's providing that power. After all, nothing like this is available for Aluber to absorb in the Ice Jade Cradle, but they do have access to the hole on demand, so nothing is stopping them from reaching through and using that power. And if this sounds a bit too much like a coincidence, I'd like to point out that Lubellion is a Searing Dragon, while Titaniclad is an Ash Dragon, both descriptors that are closely tied with the concept of fire. And the clash of these two mighty dragons comes to a head in Branded Fusion, a normal spell that fusion summons a fusion monster that lists Fallen of Albaz as material from your extra deck, using 2 monsters from your hand, deck, or field as fusion material, and you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck the turn you activate this card, except fusion monsters. Because of the wide variety of fusion material you can use, Branded Fusion can essentially Foolish Burial any dragon, any light or dark monster, any level 8 or higher monster, or any monster with 2500 or more attack. At this point, it's almost harder to find a deck that doesn't synergize with this card. And while this doesn't provide much more than a staging ground for Albaz and Aluber's battle in the lore, it will come up as an important detail for later cards. The last card we received in the Albaz structure deck was Branded Condemnation, a counter trap that you can activate in response to the activation of a spell card, trap card, or monster effect that includes an effect that special summons any number of monsters. As cost, you return some number of fusion monsters that list Fallen of Albaz as material to the extra deck, either 1 from your face-up field or 2 from your grave, and if you do, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. You can also banish this card from your grave, then target a branded spell or trap card in your grave, accept another copy of itself, and add it to your hand, but you can only use one effect per turn and only once per turn. It's a decent card that can help recycle your branded support, and while the negation can effectively be free and recycle cards if you only return Albaz fusions from your grave, it does require setup, so it's not as easily used as a card like Solemn Judgment. Chronologically, this seems to be taking place after the events of Dogmatic Cabra. We never found out how Fleur and the gang escaped from Dogmatica, and charging right through the Theater Pope seems right up their alley. The lighting of the Despia minions also seems to match the color scheme of Dogmatic Cabra, and I have to say, it was a nice touch to keep their washed out color, but everything shown in the light of Fleur's lightning blade has its vibrant color restored, as if the blade is carving a path to a literal brighter future. I also like how the mechanic reflects an anti-branded energy. Obviously, every theme introduced thus far has some kind of effect that summons monsters to help with their game plan, but fusions and rituals are the only ones that specifically need effects to function, while synchro and Xyz summoning can be performed without effects, meaning that, in the broad strokes, branded condemnation doesn't harm Springans and Swordsouls, but can be used against Dogmatica's rituals, Despia's fusions, and Albaz, as seen in the art of Judgment of the Branded. Now before we move on, I'd also like to bring up a series of tokens that were added into the structure deck that give a bit of extra flavor. The Tri-Brigade one shows all the members together with the flavor text, "Pull the trigger," which doesn't really explain anything. Like, I have so many questions about why so many of them wear gas masks, what the blue liquid is in their weapons they use as ammo or are powered by it, what the blue ribbon they all wear specifically represents, but I guess the card does look nice. The two Virtuous show Fleur and Ecclesia during a simpler time. It reads, "At times she was a caring older sister, and other times like a stern teacher. Their woven bonds are connected even now, no matter the distance." So we can safely say that they do care for each other, and they don't have a strictly business associates relationship. But it is unsettling to see that, even in tender moments like this, members of the Dogmatica clergy were on hand to observe them. Albaz the Shrouded shows a time that's likely just after they left Dogmatica, just before they met the Springans. The text reads, "Does his name point to a past sealed in darkness, or a brilliantly lit future?" Highlighting that not even Albaz remembers where they came from. Or if they do, they aren't really keen on sharing it. What threw me for a loop was this part of Albaz's outfit, which I hadn't noticed until now. This strap has a series of diamond buckles connected at the points, looking exactly like the hole chains used by Aluber, and upon reviewing previous art, this is consistent with what we see in Dogmatica Encounter and Tri-Brigade Oath, an absolutely wild detail that's been hiding in plain sight this entire time. And opposite the little dragon is Ecclesia the Exiled. Their card states, "May his blank heart be filled with many memories from this point on. Thinking of what is to come, the girl gave the boy a name." There isn't much here in terms of lore, but it is nice to know where the name Albaz came from. But they are sharing some rations while looking up into the starry night sky, and even Mercurier is there. It's a very, very sweet looking scene. The last token we have is Aluber of the Wicked Dogma, which shows the mischievous little creature that's up to no good without their mask on, proving that the two look exactly the same. Their text reads, "A being divided by the abyss. He mocks the light and tricks the darkness." And that is a very illuminating statement. Being divided by the abyss means there's some form that used to exist that was broken apart to make Aluber and Albaz, which might be why Aluber is so intent on hunting Albaz down. Meanwhile, mocking the light and tricking the darkness is such an odd phrase. Light is pretty firmly entrenched with the Dogmatica, while dark is what largely comprises the Despia, with the only light ones being previous Dogmatica artifacts. This might mean that Aluber isn't ideologically aligned with the Theater Church and is just using it to further their own goals. Having been divided by the abyss is another strangely worded phrase. Using the initial V-Jump blurb as a source, we know that the abyss comprises the entire world this story takes place in. So does that mean that the world itself tore this proto-Albaz Aluber apart? We also know that Dogmatica holds the greatest influence in the abyss, so perhaps they caused it? Experiments on such a creature would prove invaluable for an organization looking to control the whole portals, and considering Kitt did something similar with the Serpent of Golgonda, it's not outside the realm of possibility. There's a lot to unpack here, but unfortunately no definitive answers. And with the additional cards found in Dimension Force, things aren't looking like they're going to get any cheerier. Branded Forfeiture appears to be another snapshot of the battle at the Ice Jade Cradle, though it appears the skirmish has moved further up the Swordsoul mountain peak. It's a normal spell that targets a fusion monster you control and a monster your opponent controls that was special summoned from the extra deck, and during the end phase of this turn, each player can special summon a fusion monster from their extra deck that lists Fallen of Albaz as material. This is a very interesting card with limited applications. It's not destruction removal, but it does target, so that's not ideal. But the silliest thing is that this card gets worse the better Branded as a whole gets. Like, the more people who splash Albaz fusions into their extra deck for utility, the more often you'll be paired against someone who can take advantage of this symmetrical effect. And in the mirror, this is going to be incredibly stressful. What happens if you both summon Mirror Jade? But as tragic as that is, it's nothing compared to what we see here. It appears that the Despia minions have followed Ad Libitum through the portal, and are subduing Chunjun, and Libitum is dancing circles around Ecclesia's fighting style. When your opponent is standing on the handle of your weapon, things are not going well. In the background, we see this huge sphere of fire, which we can only presume is the battle between Aluber and Albaz, and since fire is the only element we see, things do not bode well for our dragon of the Ice Blade. And Ecclesia isn't the only one in trouble. Branded Exile is a normal trap that targets a Despia monster or level 8 or higher fusion monster in your grave and special summons it. Then you can apply the following effect. Fusion summon a level 8 or higher fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion material listed on it from either field. So this acts as a revival trap, not only for your Despias but your big Albaz fusions, as well as being another super polymerization type effect. While it can be responded to, it can still use your opponent's monsters as fusion material. And considering the Despia fusions ask for generically light and dark materials, this card can act as removal for a lot of things. Heck, in the mirror match, if your opponent tries using Fallen of Albaz to take your monster, you can flip Exile, summon whatever monster you want, then potentially use monsters your opponent controls as all of the fusion material. And if you get rid of Albaz, then you've effectively negated that effect. And lore-wise, it's incredibly strange that this kind of effect is available outside of Albaz and Aluber. Though it might be trying to show that Aluber does have this capability, it just wasn't added onto their card specifically. The artwork shows Fleur, now captured, at the whims of what appears to be a more draconic Despian Quiritus, with the white exiled of Dogmatica riding them into battle. The shoulder pauldrons and the eye-laden wings match up, but once again, it's the concept art that provides the final piece of connective evidence. As it states, Quiritus does have a four-legged form, and this draconic counterpart certainly fits the bill. Judging from the color scheme once again, this takes place in Dogmatica, right after Branded Condemnation. These robes seem to be like those of Dramaturge of Despia, but they look more like some kind of ooze than fabric, and it appears to be getting sucked into Quiritus, perhaps absorbing Dramaturge's energy to fuel its new form. The concept art does say that this four-legged form is brought upon by the darkness inside their armor being compressed, and despite Fleur's recent victory, they're currently being held captive by the same armor they used to wear into battle, making for quite the dramatic reversal. They've even pulled up what looks like stage wings to show that it's curtains for Fleur. Say what you will about the Despia, but they certainly aren't without a twisted sense of humor. What happens here might also show why Fleur needs treatment in the Ice Jade Cradle when they all arrive at the Swordsoul Mountain, but this reintroduces the question, how does Fleur and the gang make their escape? But we'll have to hold off on that question until the future, it would seem, as no answers seem to be forthcoming. The next card we have brings us back to the present with Dogmatica Turgi, a normal trap that ritual summons a Dogmatica ritual monster from your hand or deck by tributing Dogmatica monsters and or ritual, fusion, or synchro monsters from your field whose total levels equal exactly the level of the ritual monster you ritual summon. You can also banish this card from your grave, then target 2 Dogmatica monsters with different levels from your grave and add one of them to your hand and place the other on the bottom of the deck, and you can only use one effect per turn and only once per turn. Since our Dogmaticas are firmly either level 4 or 8, you shouldn't have much problem with fulfilling the tribute requirement, and slapping a White Exalted onto the board to steal some attack and set up for some extra deck shredding is superb, not to mention being able to recycle free cards. Since Ecclesia is here, I assume this is taking place at the Swordsoul Mountains, and in the sky we can see Dramaturge descending from a giant hole in the sky. Either Dramaturge has recuperated from their time being an ooze, or the version of Dramaturge that Fleur cut down was a fake created by Quiritus and White Exalted. Either way, they're back, and being backed up by the new Virtuous Dogmatica duo, White Exalted and the Draconic Despia Quiritus. The eyes from its wings now larger and more deranged looking, dripping like some kind of eldritch oil from beyond the portal. Even the Ice Jades are not without loss. Ice Jade Curse is a continuous spell, and while both an Ice Jade monster and Ice Jade Depth's Inian Cradle are on the field, your opponent can't activate the effects of monsters on the field that were summoned this turn. And when any number of monsters are destroyed in a battle involving your Ice Jade monsters, you can target one of those destroyed monsters and inflict damage to your opponent equal to its original attack. That's some very important wording, as the Ice Jades are rather prone to reducing your opponent's attack points. Since they're not particularly aggro, this does help to speed up the game by providing some more damage. And the effect lock fits nicely with Cosmocroy, who prevents your opponent from activating the effects of monsters except the turn they were summoned, thus reinforcing my theory that the effect negation was indicative of the primal pattern that slowly consumes the Ice Jades' bodies. When we last saw them, Empress Cosmocroy was already completely covered in the primal runes, though they were just under the surface. But instead of solidifying, like the rock formations that make up their home, the Empress has become brittle and is now breaking apart. Is this the result of Long Yuan's erosion of the Ice Jade? Or did Albaz pull too much power from the Empress to achieve their Mirror Jade form? Either way, Aegle, now the only Ice Jade of the Royal Grade, is left to watch helplessly as their Empress slowly fades away. It's a heartbreaking composition and adds to the overall helplessness of the story at hand. The last card we'll be covering today is Abyssal Dragon Alba Renatus, a level 8 Dark Dragon fusion monster with 2500 attack and defense, requiring Fallen of Albaz and one or more dragon monsters as material. This monster cannot be used as fusion material and must be either fusion summoned or special summoned by sending the above cards from either player's monster zones to the grave. This card can make a number of attacks on monsters each battle phase up to the number of material used for its summon, and once per turn during the end phase, if this card is in your grave because it was sent there this turn, you can add a Polymerization normal spell or Fusion normal spell from your deck to your hand. So now we have a dragon version of Chimeratech Overdragon, scooping up an entire dragon board once you get Fallen of Albaz onto the field. So Dragon Link decks, beware. Its multi-attacking is pretty neat, but since they can only be on monsters, I don't think we'll need to fuse with more than one dragon to get a lot of value out of them. But of course, the biggest reason to play this card is its last effect, grabbing you things like Fusion Destiny and Branded Fusion, and is going to be a great card to send with Mirror Jade's effect. Alba Renatus is arguably more useful for what it can enable rather than what it brings to the table itself. There is a lot to unpack here. If we presume that the Fallen of Albaz material is meant to represent Mirror Jade, and the dragon material being Libellion, then this is the fusion of the two, which isn't too far-fetched considering not only what we've discerned from the Aluber token, but also Yu-Gi-Oh! Stories in general. Light and dark halves of the same monster coming together is very much a recurring theme. But are they a new entity altogether, or is one in control? And I have to say, it's very likely that Aluber is the one in charge. Alba Renatus looks almost exactly like Libellion. The horns on its head, the wings, the shoulder spikes, even the chest and hand gems are present. And while the hand ones look a little gold, possibly because of the lighting, the chest gem is glowing a brilliant crimson. But there are some Albaz features here. The Albaz fusions are characterized by their grave effects that get you something during the end phase when sent to the grave. But neither of the Aluber fusions, Masquerade and Libellion, do this. So why does Alba Renatus? Well, if the two really are two halves of a whole, it makes sense this would take on some characteristics of Albaz. But what's more intriguing is the sigil appearing right in front of the chest gem. While red in color, this looks exactly like Albaz's branded in white. Heck, even then it was very, very red. You know, because of all the fire. Since Aluber's branded in red shows the whole, we can assume they are, if not one and the same, at least connected. But these four linked circles have only ever been associated with Albaz. But what's even more intriguing than that are the symbols within the four circles. The imagery is too busy to get a good look at them, but I would encourage all of you to comment down below with any guesses or information that might clear this up. We've already started the process of this on the Discord, and we might be onto something. There's also the matter of the color of Alba's armor. The metal parts of Lubellion are now the same red, almost magma-like color of Albion, which context shows is the result of branded in white, Albaz's symbol. And part of the name, Renatus, is Latin for reborn or born again, which combined with Alba sounds like it's Albaz being reborn, not a Luber. But I think the definitive piece of evidence comes once again from the Albaz Strike structure deck. But not from a card, rather in the form of some poetry that was included. Let's go through the stanzas and see if we can piece together what it means, and if it can shed any light on the story. The glittering sky is dyed a blazing red. The great Arctic superpower has become a death march. The children of God rejoice and grieve, dancing from dusk to dawn on the path before them. The skies do get noticeably redder once the Despia show themselves, but from what I can't say, though I have a hunch that the hole portals have something to do with it. The great Arctic superpower might make you think of the Ice Jade because Arctic is usually cold, but it's more about being north, and in the V-Jump blurb, Dogmatica is specifically stated as being located in the far north of the Abyss, so it's referring to Dogmatica becoming a death march, and considering the kind of garb being worn nowadays, that makes sense. The Children of God would likewise be followers of Dogmatica, and while they could be rejoicing and grieving for any number of reasons, I think it might have something to do with both of the previous saints, Ecclesia and Fleur, running away, but being replaced by the two new saints, White Exalted and Despia Queritus, while the dancing from dusk to dawn is probably meant to emphasize that they're on the move, seeking the final stigmata, the strongest, the holiest, the two brands. It's interesting that the stigmata is being referred to separately from the brands, but it is shaped differently from the ones we already know about, so that makes sense. Though I don't think it's a coincidence that the Dogmatica stigmata looks like the connecting points of two links in a whole portal chain. And I think it's safe to say that the two brands that they're looking for are the red and white held by Aluber and Albaz. The play opens, the curtain rises, Destiny toys with the boy and girl. Nothing big here, it just seems to point out that events will play out in ways that aren't too favorable to Albaz and Ecclesia, though it is framed in a very Despian style. Even if everything falls to ash, even if everything turns to dust, the bonfire lit by their two hearts will one day erupt into a true fire. But this does leave room for some hope. No matter what, their bond will result in a great power they can use to claim victory. It's interesting that Ash is capitalized because we do have an Ash Dragon, but we don't have anything that corresponds with dust. At least, not yet. Atop the great cradle, the child that fell from the hole of the abyss confronts his fate. The power of the blazing doom consumes the white darkness and becomes the flame of God. This thankfully confirms a location to help with syncing up the timeline. The child that fell from the hole is most assuredly Albaz, and confronting his fate likely means squaring off against Aluber. But who's the blazing doom and who is the white darkness? My conclusions are that Aluber is the Blazing Doom, both of their previous forms were searing and blazing after all, and Doom feels like it slots into their character just right. The White Darkness makes sense for Albaz, because despite universally being Dark Attribute in all their fusions, they're the one branded in white, and since the Blazing Doom consumes the White Darkness, this pretty solidly confirms that Alba Renatus is Aluber, and has become the Flame of God. The brand we see in front of them may also be the combined version of their brands, the strongest and the holiest. The burning flesh is like soot, but the heart is covered in a frozen flame. Its power is like an ember, yet still, their thoughts dwell in the sword. This is the last stanza, and I believe it points to the idea that Albaz, despite being overtaken, still rests within, waiting for a chance to break free, their heart covered in a frozen flame. An ember, waiting to be stoked, and their thoughts still within the ice-blade swords they wielded. Once again, the ambiguous imagery and poetry leaves us with only questions, and since that's all the cards we have in this set, we'll have to wait until the next for more answers. We're left in a very depressing state. The Swordsouls have been all but wiped out, along with the Ice Jades. Albaz appears to have been overtaken by their other half, and it's only a matter of time before Ad Libitum and Dramaturge overwhelm Ecclesia. Our only hope is that Kitt and Sargus are able to recruit the Therions, and hopefully others, in one last desperate bid to save the world, and reawaken the soul of Albaz hidden deep within Alba Renatus. At least, That's what my interpretation is. The nature of looking for lore in series of pictures and mechanics means that these findings are largely up to interpretation. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts on the lore are, and what interpretations you took away from the cards, concept art, and other sources. And if you know anyone who loves talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Lore, please share this video with them as well. The more we pull our information, the closer we'll be to understanding what's going on in the Albaz storyline. Today's episode was sponsored by my lovely patrons, including Quasar Commander Genesis Yu-Gi-Oh!, Nebula Navigators Adam Zajdel, Benjamin Meisner, Eric, Gloomba 331, Howling Zangetsu, John Manji, Panther J, Shooting Star 3300, Sun Sorrow, The Wizard Moose and the Fresh Prince of Conair, Cosmic Crusaders, Bear Sharktopus Studios, Chaz Ghost, Colin Todd, Manga Pages, RGS and the Legendary Raven, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to be a part of these credits, as well as seeing my episodes early, please check out my Patreon links in the description to see if I have anything you'd like on offer. And if you want to see my journey through the Albaz storyline, check out this playlist where you can start from the beginning with Dogmatica and Tri-Brigade. And if you want to see two Yugi tubers going at it, check out Noah Jenkinai's latest series, Progression Polls, where your voice shapes the format. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.